Hi, welcome back to my read-along of A Tale of Stars and Shadow. Today we are up to chapter 13. Let's jump right into it. Can't wait. Okay. He stood watching the Azurdia workers return from the forest, climbing one by one up the ladder from the tunnel and out into the street. 6 patrolmen stood at the top of the ladder, one of them marking off names. Each worker carried a ceramic pot under their arm. 2 falcons were there too, taking the pot before the workers were allowed to leave and go to their homes, or to line up to be taken back to the cells if they were working off a sentence. Whenever he had the time, whenever he was in Dock City at sunset, he made a point of watching the workers return, and each time he marked their haggard appearance, the twitchiness in their shoulders, and the look of fear still fading from their eyes. And he counted the ones that had to be helped up the ladder by their fellow workers, either hurt while climbing trees for the Azurdia, or attacked by one of the forest-dwelling creatures. Anger burned, hot and strong, enough to turn his hands into white-knuckled fists at his sides. All the wingguard had to do was send a falcon detail beyond the wall to guard the workers. With proper armed guards, they could do their work without fear of attack. The falcons had wings, they didn't have to fear like the humans did, yet they still refused. It was shameful, arrogant beyond belief, and he hated it. Once the last worker dragged himself to the top of the ladder, it took 2 patrolmen to lift the heavy barred gate and swing it down over the opening. Once it settled into place, they chained and locked it closed. Even though there were heavily barred gates at the other end of the tunnel too, this entrance wouldn't be opened again until full daylight. By then the falcons were gone, winging their way up to the citadel with the day's collection of Azurdia carefully stacked into a cushioned sack they carried between them. The Shadowhawk's gaze tracked them as they flew. It was never stored in the same place. The stuff was too volatile, and the winged folk would never risk an accidental explosion in their beautiful citadel. And it was sold in a trickle, the Queen's Treasury and trade councillors carefully releasing to market to ensure they fetched the highest price possible and that demand remained high. The profit it made went right back into the winged folk coffers. He'd considered stealing it before. Azurdia was Mithrana's most valuable trading commodity. The winged folk, and the royal family in particular, wouldn't have the wealth they did without the prices Azurdia commanded and their monopoly of the market. If he took that away, he could cripple them. The output from the copper mines in the north and the valuable wood trade wouldn't be enough to prop up their lifestyle. But Azurdia was dangerous, and the humans were angry, knowing full well they never benefited from the profits of the sap that they risked their life to collect. There was no guarantee he'd be able to keep the stuff controlled if he stole it. There was no way to ensure it wouldn't be used for purposes other than selling. Still, he pushed off the wall he'd been leaning against, dismissing thoughts of Azurdia and what might be done with it. Night was falling over the city now, and he had somewhere to be. After crossing the bridge into the poor quarter, he turned off the main street and moved quickly into the warren of dim back alleys that made up the quarter. Once he was alone in the darkness, he tugged the mask from his pocket and slid it down over his face. Then he unbuttoned his shirt and pulled out the thin cloak that had been lying, folded flat, against his skin. It was damp with sweat, and he made a face as he shook it out, then swung it around his shoulders. With a final look around to ensure he was still alone in the alley and nobody had seen him, he set off again. A quarter-turn's walk brought him around and back to the eastern side of the bridge. He'd taken a convoluted enough path that he was confident he hadn't been followed. It also meant he was slightly late. It was deliberate, so he could take stock of his contact and the surroundings as he approached. The man leaned against the wall, boots crossed at the ankle, watchful air hovering around him like the cloak the Shadowhawk wore. "You're late." The Shadowhawk didn't reply, eyes scanning everything around his contact. Nothing he saw or sensed alarmed him. Everything looked and sounded as it should for this time of night in the poor quarter. For the moment the street was empty, but it wasn't guaranteed to remain that way. This particular block was gang territory, and even though he had a tentative arrangement with all of the gangs in the poor quarter, he'd leave them alone if they did the same in return. He'd rather not deal with any of their thugs. He jerked his head for the man to follow as he turned off the street into a narrow alley between 2 buildings. The rotting scent of sewerage mixed with decaying something hit his nose, and he muttered a curse as his stomach threatened to rebel. "Don't tell me the Shadowhawk is too precious to get down in the gutters with the poor folk," the man's mocking voice rang out. He ignored the jibe. "What do you have for me, Zamaril?" Zamaril shrugged. "What do you want? I said I'd keep an eye out to make sure she wasn't going to be a problem for you. So far all she's done is make us clean and run." "That's all you've got?" the Shadowhawk said, disbelief edging his voice. "The best thief in Dock City, and all you can tell me is she makes you clean and run?" There was a moment's silence, then, "She's not like the wingguard," he said begrudgingly. But she was brought here for a purpose, though she says she's only here for a year, until next 1 month. And choosing human criminals for Prince Kieran's guard, it's pure insanity. There's something going on. Right, impatience threaded his voice, which is why I asked you to find out what that is. I'm not one of your network spies, Shadowhawk, Zamaril snarled. This is a favour, and one I'm only doing because you're a thorn in the side of those miserable falcons. I'm aware of that. He tried to keep his frustration in check. But if I get caught, if her arrival here interferes with my work, then the humans lose out. Zamaril nodded. I'll keep an eye and an ear out. She's very earnest. A note of bewilderment flashed in his voice. If there's an ulterior motive in bringing her here, I'm not sure she's aware of what it is. Has she told you why she's here? We haven't asked and she hasn't offered. He gave a languid shrug. He cursed under his breath. Zamaril, for a thief, you make a terrible spy. Ask the flea-bitten question, will you? Judging from what I know of you, she's not going to be surprised with you flinging a question like that at her. At least that might tell us why she's here now. Zamaril's face tightened at the Shadowhawk's tone, but he nodded. I'll ask. She's big on honesty and trust, or so she claims, so she'll find it hard to wriggle out of an answer. So you think she's innocent? Oh no. The thief's head came up. The way she talks, the way she behaves, she's no simple Kingshield guard. I'd bet a large bag of jewels on it. She might not be aware of whatever alternative motives are at play, but there's a lot going on behind that cool exterior of hers. I'd risk a smaller bag of jewels that the Twin Thrones is sniffing around here for some reason of their own too. Interesting. Maybe his assumption that Mithranar had initiated the request for a Kingshield was wrong. Find out what she knows, or thinks she knows, but focus on the Falcon's purpose in all this. I still think he, or one of the royals, must have asked for her. Whatever the Twin Thrones' political motives are, they're unlikely to have anything to do with the Shadowhawk. Fine, he pushed off the wall. This alley stinks, so I'm out. I'll let you know next time I've got something to tell you. Thank you for your help, Zamaril. I'm not doing it for you. The Shadowhawk waited until the thief's soft footfalls had vanished entirely from hearing before he moved. He walked another convoluted route through the back streets of the Poor Quarter, then crossed the rush over one of the makeshift wooden bridges used by the fisherfolk accessing their boats down near where the river flowed into the bay. It was closing in on midnight when he carefully approached the back of the Fish and Fly, a dive frequented by sailors that conveniently backed onto a dark and stinking alley. Here, behind a loose brick in the worst-smelling section of the alley, his dock quarter contact left messages. One waited for him, as expected, though he cursed under his breath as he read its contents. One of the shipments they'd been waiting on, fresh supplies of seeds for planting ahead of the monsoon season, had arrived 3 days earlier. It had taken him too long to come for the message. Damn it, he swore again. He crumbled the note in his hands and replaced the brick before wrapping himself in shadows and walking away. The seed shipment would be long gone, spirited up to the Citadel by now, which meant a long night of scribing out notes awaited him. Okay, that's the end of chapter 13. As always, here's your chance to jump out if you don't want any spoilers from my author commentary. If you are jumping out here, I hope you enjoyed, and I really look forward to seeing you for chapter 14. All right, let's jump into some author commentary for this chapter. All right, let's chat about the Shadowhawk. So he starts off this chapter obviously watching the Azurdia workers returning from a day in the jungle beyond the wall, extracting the Azurdia sap from the trees. And this is a priceless commodity for Mithranar. The Condor family uses it to essentially bolster their entire economy. It's a priceless substance. It goes for a lot of money, and they tightly control how that substance is sold on the market in order to keep the lifestyle that they have. From Kieran's perspective as the Shadowhawk, he feels an enormous amount of guilt because of the conditions under which that sap is extracted, that no one is sent to protect or defend them, that the Falcons aren't willing to risk themselves even though they're trained soldiers and they have the capacity to do so. And that guilt eats away at him, and that's why he's doing what he is doing as a Shadowhawk. He feels like it's the only way that he can contribute and help. But that guilt that he feels is the Dumnorix part of him, right? So that little bit of magic that shimmers in the Dumnorix blood, part of that is a sense of protectiveness and a sense of responsibility for the people that they rule. Kieran feels that very much, even though he doesn't know why. And worse for him, he doesn't have any Dumnorix relatives around. And for those of you who have read the books, and this comes out a lot more in the world books that I've written in this world that haven't published that are in this series, that are in this world, sorry, the Dumnorics thrive when they're together. They struggle when they're apart. That magic in their blood bonds them in a way that helps them thrive when they're around each other, and actually results in them struggling quite a lot when they're alone. And Kieran's been alone his entire life. So all of this is kind of mixed up in him, and he's feeling the weight of it, even though he's still trying his best to do something to help, even though he doesn't feel like that's enough. And then he pops off to visit Zamaril, of course, and Zamaril is Zamaril. He's just as rude and unhelpful to the Shadowhawk as he is to Talon. You can kind of see from this exchange that Talon's started to get inside his skin just a little bit. He doesn't quite know what to make of her, but he's far from trusting anyone. He's only helping the Shadowhawk because he can, and he's not necessarily putting a lot of investment into it. But he's out for himself at this point, and that's Zamaril, and we'll see him kind of start to change as the books progress. Yeah, short and sweet chapter. Any questions, as always, please drop them in the comments below. I'd love to answer. Please also consider liking and subscribing. That helps me a lot. But otherwise, I can't wait to get into the next chapter with you all, chapter 14, another Talon chapter. I'll see you soon and have a great day.